Hello, my name is Kunal Bhasin. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Scoot Networks. What does Scoot do? Scoot is we like to call ourselves the first, the original scooter sharing company that was started in San Francisco in 2012 by our founder, Michael Keating. We do three things. We provide electric, clean, fast, and affordable service for our end users to get around the city, while working with city officials to make sure that we follow all the regulations and create a service that is really safe for our end users and easy to use. And we run the operations to make sure that our fleet is always up and available for our users.
Sweet. Nelle?
I'm Nelle Pierson with Jump Bikes. We're headquartered in New York City. I'm in Washington, D.C. as our head of communications and community. Can y'all hear me too? Is this okay? Good in the back? Jump Bikes is bike share electrified. We want to be the bike that you want. And we're in 6 cities now. Hopefully scale that up. Hopefully get to talk about that on the panel today. And really excited to be here. Thank you.
Steve?
Hi, Stephen Smyth, co-founder, CEO of Coord. So we're an Alphabet-backed company. We're building the developer platform for the mobility market. And really what we're driven by, our passion is empowering software developers to integrate access to transportation everywhere. We want to democratize access to seamless mobility. So that's what we're up to, and happy to be here. Thank you.
Cool. So to get us started, urban mobility companies, including the ones represented up here on stage, have raised over $4 billion in the last several years alone. Not to mention the recent acquisitions of Jump and Mobike, amongst others. So there's been a virtual arms race for sidewalk and street space amongst the different companies. But what is the right mix of transportation options, and what sort of businesses and business models are going to be best suited to provide it? Maybe kick us off, Stephen, you want to start, and we can just kind of have an open discussion here and go from there.
Yeah. So we at Coord are very interested in sidewalks and street space. In fact, one of the APIs that's most popular in our platform today is our Curbs API. And so a year plus ago, we became fascinated by this idea of the curb as kind of the nexus of a lot of the change that's occurring in cities. And surely, people use curbs for parking, delivery trucks, that kind of thing. But obviously, we're seeing, even in the last 6-12 months, a transformation of the sidewalk and the curb. And so we've done a lot of work to actually digitize these curbs. We've actually taken in data from some city sources, but also actually created our own, where it simply did not exist, and actually surveyed key parts of San Francisco, LA. And so we're seeing just a ton of, I think, obvious use cases that I think have a digital manifestation or digital support, but also new things that we hadn't thought about. So we've had conversations with companies, bike share, scooter companies that are interested in leveraging access to parking lots, so they can actually store bikes and scooters in new places off of the sidewalk, for example. So I think we're seeing cities transform, and the sort of fixed infrastructure, which is really what curbs and sidewalks are, is finding new uses. And obviously there are a lot of challenges that come with that in terms of folks essentially using the sidewalk as a road, and the safety issues that come with that. And I think we'll see a balance achieved where we can get the best uses out of these pieces of infrastructure, while not putting people in danger and so forth. And so we're just seeing a ton of change in this area, and we want to support that change and provide better information for all the participants in the market. Ultimately, is how we look at this. And so yeah.
So Nelle, obviously Jump is in a brave new world now with its recent integration with Uber. How do you think about bikes alongside other modes of transport as part of a service offering that works for people?
A little bit of background. I worked at the local level for bike advocacy groups for about the last decade. So biking is very near and dear to my heart, to the extent that I have a bicycle tattooed on my heart. So what's the reallocation of transportation options? What's the reallocation of public space? For me and for us at Jump, it's with clear priority to bicycles. In this next 15, 5, 2 years, 40 years between now and autonomous vehicle saturation, we need to think very critically about how space is allocated to prioritize not just more cars on our roads, but how physical bodies are moving around on our roadways. So we see this as like as a really important window in bringing out more people into public space and experiencing it, not just from the sidewalk perspective, but what is it like traveling in a safe, separated, protected bike lane, and what are cities all around the world doing right now to ensure that those networks are being built out quickly. So I think, to summarize, we're all for more options. We would just like to see cities prioritizing ones that put people first.
So I want to pick up on the city's point, because this is a really complex dynamic. Obviously, the push scooters being a recent example of the interactions with cities and the difficulty there. But what role should cities play? And especially thinking about market expansion, how do you think about expanding into markets where the cities don't have a clear plan yet for how to regulate your services? And maybe Kunal, especially given your news today with Barcelona, maybe we'd love for you to kick that one off.
Yeah, for people who don't know, we announced today that we've launched Barcelona as our second city with 1,000 electric bicycles and 500 electric scooters, mopeds.
Wait, let that sink in. 1,000 bicycles.
Big fleet.
Yep. It's a city with a larger population than San Francisco, a local scooter culture, so it was a really good fit for what we do. Having said that, along with people's needs, which is obviously foremost and most important in terms of the user experience, we provide another big factor is what are we doing for the global community, which is carbon emissions and hence electric. But a big point here is every city, we view them as a platform, and these platforms have been created over time for the existing transportation services that are available in the last 3 to 4 decades. So you see bus stations and gas stations and a lot of gas-driven cars on the road that create congestion. And reducing congestion is another big mission for Scoot with the different cities. So you can't avoid working with the cities to create these platforms. For example, Barcelona has a much friendlier scooter culture when it comes to street cleaning and tickets and bike lanes and so on, and that went into our decision to go to Barcelona as well. But we feel strongly that it's a collaboration between companies that are on this panel, the city officials, public officials, and our end users to create the mobility options for the future. Things like ride sharing and smaller, lighter vehicles reduce congestion, electric reduces carbon emissions, and we create a better global planet. That's the bigger mission.
You mentioned, how is Barcelona regulating these services right now? Have they figured that out yet? And how did that impact your launch timing?
Yeah, as far as the city's view, that is something that you have to ask the city officials. What our value system is that we work very closely with the city officials to make sure that we are in alignment with the local culture, the safety elements of our service, as well as providing the service that is good for the city in terms of how they're thinking of growing mobility options in that city.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about market expansion, Nelle, you've DC and SF, first 2 cities, let me get this right, Santa Cruz, Sacramento, Providence, Rhode Island, next 3, Chicago probably soon. How do you think about prioritizing cities for launch, and especially as governments have various stages of what they are doing to regulate or not regulate the services you're providing?
I think our response is probably similar to Scoot's response. We want to work really well with cities. Bikeshare 1.0 was a 2 or 5 year permitting process where it was a very competitive environment and you had 3 to 5 teams competing for a permit. Bikeshare 2.0 is what we've seen in Chinese cities where you saturate the city to the point that you're just hoping people use your bikes, regardless of permitting framework. And I think we're in Bikeshare 3.0, which is, okay, let's identify what a city wants. Let's push them in the direction of optimization and performance-based metrics. Let's show cities what it's like to use tools like Mapbox that allow us on our back end to see that, okay, our bikes are out on the streets and we have as much control as we possibly can on each of those individual bikes. And so I think this permitting framework in Bikeshare 3.0 allows us to approach a city and say, we have the tools, thanks to Mapbox, thanks to our brilliant engineers, to be able to control our assets as much as possible and ensure they're being used. And why is that important? Because We need to show our utility, especially when monetizing public space. We need to show that we're providing an especially valuable service. So what are those performance-based policies that allow us to scale with care? If we come to the city of Austin and say, hey, Austin, what's up? We're going to provide 7 trips per bike per day. And when we reach that point, or maintain it over a certain point of time, we would like to scale our fleet by X%. So what are the different measures that we're showing that we're meeting in order to scale and actually meet demand, these demand-based practices?
Yeah, I think Seattle is an interesting lesson. So they initially had a docked system, and then I forget the exact dates, but basically last year they transitioned over a 6-month period to a dockless system.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting, I thought about that, was as a condition of the operating licenses, and you would probably know this better than I, the successful operators had to basically pool data into a neutral data exchange, in that case operated by the University of Washington. And I thought this was a particularly interesting approach. I think that we'll see this more and more, not just as it relates to bike share, scooters, et cetera, but also potentially sort of back-regulating into ride-hail and other areas. So I expect that we'll see a trend like that of essentially city-based data exchanges, because I think we think about the market dynamic here, and really we see cities as kind of the logical market sort of organizing principle. So it's sort of city-based markets, because they're essentially city-based regulators. And so we think that that's a trend. I think that in our platform today, we have many city agencies who actually use our APIs, not just to understand more about what's going on with bike share. We have a bike share API covering 65 odd systems, docked and dockless, but also curbs and tolls and other aspects of the regional sort of transportation infrastructure, both fixed and movable. And so we have a lot of very collaborative and constructive conversations, engagement with public entities, and it's clear there's a hunger to understand more about what's going on in their cities. They don't always have the best tools to do so, and tools like Mapbox, like ourselves, et cetera, I think can help to fill that gap. And so we're I think seeing an up-leveling in general in the system. And certain cities are obviously more advanced than others, but I think we're obviously information knowledge is power, and we're seeing more and more of that occurring. So I'm optimistic about the future as it relates to interactions with the public sector and the private sector.
Which that gets at one of your earlier questions about what is the emerging role of municipalities.
Yeah.
And it's this permitting oversight role.
Yeah, it's compliance.
In the short
regulation.
run, they may not be running micromobility.
Yep.
They may be in the long run. But right now, I want that person who's running the micromobility project to have a dashboard
All the data.
that maybe you make one day that's pulling in all of our information that says, all right, how many bikes are outside of our jurisdiction right now? Or who has the lowest trip per bikes per day and who is not following our rules?
Yep.
But this is especially important with equity and accessibility. We need to make sure that these assets are staying in important parts of our regions.
Yep.
We cannot allow all of our bikes or scooters or flying devices to end up in the most affluent neighborhoods where there is possibly a stronger market in the short run. We need to be using these tools right now to ensure that more people are being served.
Yeah. To that point of data, who do you all see is doing interesting things or innovative things with the data that they're starting to get? Because I was having a conversation yesterday with one of our customers, Remix, and Remix builds tools for city planners. And they were saying the old method of trip planning research was literally walking around, going on buses and saying, where are you going from? Where are you going to? Record. Literally, that's how it used to work. And now with these, new data access that's enabled by some of the new companies doing bike and scooter share, that data is available for all trips, instantly, very cheaply. But who's doing interesting stuff here? What cities, what sort of things, or are there opportunities that no one's doing yet?
I have 3 really fun examples, and tell me if I'm taking up too much mic space. I'll jump in. So there's this one developer in DC where we have a problem in DC where we don't have enough bikes. We have not become a reliable service because there aren't enough bikes. And this person created an app that sends him an alert whenever a bike is within a quarter mile. So he knows to reserve that bike and hold it so that it becomes more reliable. The second example is what I hope happens with our data in the future, and it's being able to use demographic information and usage and pass that on to cities to prioritize infrastructure. If we can identify a corridor that's more frequently serving women over the age of 75 and they're going at a pace of 12 miles per hour, what does that trail need to be like? What are its widths? What are the certain traffic calming measures that need to be at the start or end of that trail? And the third is just, I mean, it's the use case that we have internally, and this isn't your question directly, but how are we addressing the traveling salesman problem of being able to service our fleets in the most direct and efficient way possible?
Yeah, anything come to mind for either of you?
Yeah. So, I can talk to how Scoot is using a lot of the data. I mean, we've been in San Francisco for over 4 years now and collect a lot of data around, how our rides are and what the ride traces are and how the users are using our service. And I feel the primary aspect where I see the future is machine learning. So we do things like looking at street parking signs and making sure the users follow the rules. By collecting that data, we make sure that our fraud detection keeps the users who create mischief on these vehicles and don't follow rules out of the network. We also look at, to your point, the operational element, where how do we create the most efficient way of servicing our fleet and keeping it up in terms of battery charge levels and availability locations that we provide to our users, again, by learning ride behavior. So I think through more collaboration between services and creating this micro mobility of chaining between services, there's a lot of room for using collaborative data to provide the best service for our end users and doing the best thing in terms of regulations.
You mentioned
with the cities.
Collaboration, and I think it's important to kind of highlight a thing that is sort of at odds with that. Most, as businesses are wont to do, are trying to attract folks to their direct channel, which is a mobility app. And typically, folks are in competition, multiple bike share providers, et cetera. And so we see a challenge in the market that, frankly, may serve a business goal, but actually does not necessarily serve an end user goal around ultimately what this is that it's essentially about efficient allocation of space and doing that optimally through time. And so, while I may be a customer of bike share provider number one, bike share provider number two actually has a bike that's close by and available. Bike share number one does not. And how do we solve for that? Because that could be the right outcome for the end user. And so I think collaboration is important, but we believe strongly at Coord that there has to be technical integration. And we see the market evolving in that fashion. I think that Uber and Jump is an obvious example of that kind of integration. First a partnership, then an acquisition. And so we are seeing this trend of integration, essentially, not just between mobility providers, but also employers integrating mobility, healthcare systems integrating mobility. I mentioned regulators, essentially, in the Seattle example, and retailers and so forth. And so we see a trend there. I think it will take time because and I think there's an open question to what degree regulators, frankly, force that as a condition of operating in a city. So I think this is an open business and market and city question that I think is worth posing.
Cool. Yeah, arguably the 800-pound gorilla in the room is electric push scooter sharing. So this is Bird and Lime and Spin here in San Francisco and a couple other companies in other cities around the country. At least until June 4th, when San Francisco temporarily takes them off the streets here to get regulated. But these companies have exploded. Bird is rumored to be raising $150 million additional money right now at $1 billion valuation, rumored to be led by Sequoia. The information recently reported that Lyft has been considering starting their own scooter sharing network here in San Francisco. Are either of your companies planning to get into the market? How do you think about that across other offerings? Again, this is
like lock eyes first. like on the count of three, we both say.
Well, I mean, Scoot is a multimodal electric vehicle network, meaning we really look at vehicles as, we are agnostic to a vehicle type. We look at vehicles as a way of solving a use case. So an e-bike is great for a leisurely ride or a shortish ride, less than 2 miles. A scooter is great for going to commute because time is important and you want to dodge traffic and you want to be able to get there fast and not worry about parking. e-scooters remains to be seen as far as, I mean, there's the, there's the current numbers on how the current companies are doing, but remains to be seen what actual purpose they solve. It's definitely a good alternative to walking.
Yeah.
But some of the things that don't, kind of go with our value system is leaving them on sidewalks and being a safety issue for pedestrians, for example. So till we have a complete solution like we did with our moped scooters as well as e-bikes in Barcelona, where there is a safety element, the infrastructure lock element, the regulations element, all converging into a service that's good for the users, we wouldn't be launching a vehicle that doesn't follow all of those.
About Jump. And again, the permitting process, if you hadn't been following this closely, San Francisco has announced in the last week they're going to do permitting for push scooters. You can apply, and then they'll be removed temporarily on June 4th until they decide who gets a permit. But how about Jump? How are they thinking about scooters?
Well, what I'm about to do is what they call a pivot in my line of business.
Head of communications.
I think the point that I want to really bring home is that we're not fighting over sidewalk space. It's not an arms race for sidewalk space. It doesn't matter what types of tools that we're using in our daily life. What are we doing to take back the 90% of public space that we've allocated to cars over the last 70 years? And what are we doing to ensure that our stuff doesn't wind up on sidewalks and get in the way of business owners or people in wheelchairs or residents who are blind or have visual impairments? And for us, that looks like a network of on-street protected bike parking corrals, which I believe there are some here in San Francisco. There are so many opportunities to take away space on our roadways that wouldn't necessarily remove car parking, the daylighting space at intersections. And this is not just a resource that we need in our companies and our users, but anybody who rides a bicycle needs more bike parking. So that's my project right now, Stephen. Thanks for asking.
You're welcome. You actually did segue really well to a question I wanted to follow up on, which is
that.
which is integration with existing options, right? So I'll throw out a couple data points on this. Spin, who does bike and scooter sharing, said that 20% of their rides are starting or ending at transit hubs right now. Lime claimed that for them is over 40%. These are big numbers, but what can be done to better integrate the newer models of mobility within cities that Scoot and Jump and other companies do, along with existing options like buses and trains and subways? Would love for any of you, you all have different views on this from your companies, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on what we can do to better connect these services, because I think this is a huge opportunity.
So coincidentally, we announced the release of a tool that solves exactly this problem today.
Unrelated.
It's the first real-time hosted mixed mode router, so it's a mouthful.
Wow.
What does that really mean?
What that really means is, for the first time, we're actually connecting essentially the private sector and the public sector with a router. So it's a routing API. If you go to our platform today, Coord.co, and basically,
I feel like we need a round of applause first. That's incredible.
thank you, and thank you. And I think we're excited about this because this obviously expands the reach of a bike share network, a scooter network, et cetera. So it's not just a place to get from A to B, but now at B can actually be a transit stop. So get on the subway, get on the bus, et cetera. It also begins to address, I think, what the data seems to be bearing out, that certain services are actually taking ridership away from transit. And this actually makes transit relevant in more ways now. And so we're very excited about that too. Because ultimately, fixed transit routes and fixed transit modes are a part of the answer. And they're, to your point, Kunal, they're different horses for different courses. And in New York City, where we live and where I'm based, we use the subway heavily, obviously. And so we're excited about the ability to connect these two things. We've actually layered this on top of our bike share API. So again, we integrate 65 odd systems across the country. And a router is only as good as the data upon which it operates. And so that was really an important step for us. And so we built out a demo app so you can see how it works for DC and New York. More major cities coming in the next week. So we're super excited about this. Because ultimately, we as individuals and cities want we don't want to be our own travel agent, toggling between different apps and figuring out all the different segments and paying different people. If you're lucky, they have an app. If they're not, you're offline, and good luck. And so we see essentially a future of trip bundles. We do this every day when we book flights, add car rentals, hotels. We think our vision is ground transportation in cities can work the same way. Smartphones and cloud computing can deliver this cheaply, and machine learning can predict, will there be a bike available when I get there? That's a frustration in bike share networks today, for example. So we're very excited about the power of this kind of tool. And I think it directly addresses the theme.
Yeah. I feel like some of this actually already exists today, which is, our focus, you can't be, one size fits all. So our focus is last mile and first mile mobility, which is intra-city, going from point A to point B. And hence, we don't have a service that takes you to Palo Alto or the Peninsula or Silicon Valley. And so if you take Caltrain or if you take BART, it's very easy before you get to your station to, open up your Scoot app and reserve a scooter close to those
why don't you resell Caltrain through the Scoot app?
Yeah, no, that's something that
Like
we've looked at.
Priceline sells.
Yeah. We've looked very seriously at collaborating, with the various transportation subsidized and otherwise options. So I see this as a collaboration in the long term between private companies, public Fortune 500 companies, as well as public subsidized space and city and the government. Having said that, all of these sectors move at a different pace, and hence to converge, it takes time. And what's more important to me is when you do connect these dots and connect these different services, how does it affect the end-to-end safety and regulation element, as well as the ease of use for the end user. For example, we do a lot of things, and these things need to be built end-to-end, meaning in the app and how you serve, for example, your mapping routes, and how you service the fleet, and how your users actually interact with the vehicle. Now, one example is self-policing, which is you can just give us a checklist of things like wear a helmet, don't ride it on the on the pedestrian sidewalks, and so on. But we go one step further, which is we enforce these rules in the app. We draw what's called blue zones and parking zones. If you go outside the parking zone, you cannot actually end the ride. We make our users accountable in terms of, are you doing fraud? Are you doing something that's mischievous, by tracing? So all companies and all the different parties involved in any journey from A to B need to have that level of rigor and enforcement. Otherwise, the end-to-end safety doesn't work. Yeah. And hence, that's what takes time, to build integrations to that level.
So we've got time for 2 questions. One of them is going to be rapid fire, but the one I want to hit before we wrap up here is on product innovation. And we have jump bikes outside, and obviously scooters you can see up and down the streets here. But both of your companies have innovated in pretty cool ways with the actual physical product. Would love for you to share just a little bit about what are some of the things you've done to really customize and build products that are not just straight off the shelf for your users. And it's been an evolution in both cases, but in your case, Kunal, either the scooters or the electric bikes you have, and then Nelle, obviously your electric bikes both are pretty fascinating vehicles from my perspective, at least as a recreational cyclist. But yeah, we'd love to hear both of you talk to that, and then we'll wrap up here with one final question.
I can start. So for us, the innovation is really around making a vehicle that's a great experience, as well as makes it easy for you to make your journey safe and follow the regulations that the city wants all users to follow. And hence, we don't go completely off the shelf. A lot of these new vehicles you're seeing are pretty much what you can buy on Amazon on the road and connected to the cloud.
That's true.
What we've done is, for example, on our scooters, we take a vehicle and put a helmet box, so our users have helmets. We on our e-bike that we built from the ground up, similar to Jump.
It launched in Barcelona.
It launched in Barcelona today, thank you. Has infrastructure lock, just like Jump, so we can, users don't just leave them on sidewalks without tethered.
So it has to be locked to something, yeah. It can't just be standalone.
Exactly,
right?
And then there are a lot of innovations, like I said, around data, machine learning, and user experience that we do. But on the vehicles themselves, it's geared more towards safety and user experience.
What about you, Nelle?
Great. I'm told I have 1 minute.
Yep.
Well, yes.
This product needs to sit out in public space year-round, and we've learned since 2010, as we've been building these bikes, that you need to be as durable as possible. So just like you all, we've customized every bit and piece on the part, all proprietary. Even our brake levers are reversed, both as like an homage to the original design of bicycles, but also to enclose all of the brake lines so that they're more tamper-proof. We're definitely excited about iterating. What does it mean to have a cable lock so it's less clunky? What does it mean to have an app integrated that potentially could have directional tools
Navigation?
used through your SDKs? Who
Turn-by-turn
knows?
navigation,
Who
maybe?
knows what? Maybe there's a VR. No. No.
Talk to Adam.
There are lots of exciting
Blockchain.
There are a lot of exciting improvements in the pipeline. And
Yeah.
what I'd like to home in on is that our bike itself has this design already planned so that we can iterate on the current frame so that we're not scrapping our bikes to make improvements. We really believe in the footprint of our company and ensuring that those bikes live as long as possible.
Cool. So final rapid fire question for all of you.
I
Even,
think
I'm
we're
sorry,
getting the cut.
Nelle gets the last word on this one.
Okay.
It's
All right,
lunchtime, sir.
Steven.
Awesome. Lunchtime it is.
A warm round of applause,
Two
please.
scooters.
Thank the panelists.